Good afternoon all. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon's EAP for Prosperous Communities on the 11th of May. First item on the agenda, apologies for non-attendance.
I have no apologies for non-attendance. Councillor Lynn Buckingham is joining us via MS Teams.
I have, though. Councillor Rowley has just a message to say that he's been called away on business, so
okay, I'll record.
May not get back.
I'll record Councillor Rowley. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Item number 2, members' declarations of interest. I'm looking around the room. Any hands for any declarations? Excellent. No declarations. Item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of March 2023. I assume members have had their opportunity to read them. Are there any comments, corrections or oversights that members wish to raise? Looks good to me. In that case then, please can I have a proposer for those minutes? Thank you very much, Councillor Allibone. And somebody to second? Councillor Mercer, you were there just in time. And show of hands, all in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Item number 4, local transport plan, and I hand over to co-chair.
Co-jack, not co-chair. So one of the most important documents that we have in the Highways Department will be the local transport plan. Formulates a lot of things. I don't want to steal the officer's thunder, so I won't say much more, but it's an opportunity for the EAP to look at the process, offer any suggestions about how we should go about it, and also matters that might go in it. It will cover quite a wide range, and there may be some daughter documents as well that we will use, because that's a bit more a flexible way of doing it. So I'll introduce Mrs. Crew, who is the officer who's going to lead this, and if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Councillor. My name is Sally Crew. I'm the Interim Transport Strategy Manager here at North Hants. And as Councillor Lorman set out, I'm going to talk about the local transport plan, what it is, how we will develop it, the stages of development, and then at the end set forward a timeline. And this is presented very much as an opportunity for input and discussion on the process that we've set out. So hopefully at the end we'll have some time to have some Q&A and a bit of a chat around how we're proposing to do it. If you just bear with me a sec, I'm just going to set up the sharing. Oh. Okay. So, what is our local transport plan? As Councillor Lorman set out, it's our strategy to guide transport locally. It sets out our investment priorities and is used to support funding bids to the DfD and to other government bodies like Active Travel England. It's a statutory document, and therefore we've got to follow set processes. We need to go through a full public consultation, and it also needs to be supported by relevant impact assessments, which we've pulled together as a impact assessment. As set out, our current LTP is quite old. It dates from 2012. And as Councillor Lorman set out, it has a main transport plan and then a set of thematic plans, which are generally modally based. So there's a cycling plan, a walking plan, a rail plan, etc. And a series of geographical plans, so town centre plans effectively. So it's really important in developing the local transport plan that we capture local needs, values and aspirations, and we start to distill this into priorities and an investment plan. And those priorities and investment plans are properly assessed and tracked and monitored, so we know that we can deliver the plan with confidence and that we've got the mechanisms in place to recognise if we're not delivering, to adapt and change. The local transport plan obviously needs to be developed in the context of the existing plans that we already have, whether that be the corporate plan, the LDF, or the local development framework, and I guess more relevant to us transport people, documents like our bus service improvement plan. But it also needs to be mindful of the emerging plans, and we have quite a number of emerging plans, one of which you're going to talk about straight after this, which is the car parking strategy. So we also need to be mindful of our local walking and cycling investment plans, our EV strategy, and lots of the other strategies that are emerging at the moment. As I said at the start, it's a statutory document. We need to submit it to DFT, and it needs to go to the Secretary of State for approval. And therefore, we are looking to guidance from the DFT. We've been expecting it for some time now, and it has been somewhat delayed, and it continues to be delayed. The discussion that we've had with officers within our regional transport group and also with the DFT indicate that we expect it imminently, that it was being held prior to the elections and that we should expect it soon. So we're hoping to see something in the next couple of months. But what we do know from those discussions is that there's certain things that we think will emerge in prevalence within that guidance. And one really is the decarbonisation of transport, which has been a very strong government initiative. And accompanying that, some technical assessment around how we will do that. So that comes in the form of what is described as a quantifiable carbon reduction, so a technical piece of work to assess how we're going. The other indications is that there'll be a requirement to have it more strongly linked to local plans and to the planning system, and to see how we can truly embed transport within that discussion. But we wait the guidance, and that's just what we hear and emerges, so we will, I'm sure, adapt as that guidance comes forward. Okay. So that is what is a local transport plan, and this is how we're proposing for it to be developed. So we've set out 6 stages. These are building blocks, so each stage builds upon the last to take us further along the line to adopting the plan. I'm going to go through each of these stages now in a bit more detail. So the first stage we have is establishing the context. As we said, the 2012 plan has aged somewhat, and lots of things have changed, both locally from the new homes and new businesses that have come to the authority, but also how people travel, and the pandemic's a good example of that, about how our high streets haven't fully recovered, and the commuting patterns have changed. We'll look at what we've delivered in the last 10 years, what we've learnt from that delivery, and what we can take forward as we develop the LTP. We're also conscious that we've spoken to the community quite a lot, and there's a need to capture what people have said, so they don't need to tell us again. So go through and have a look at what people have said and understand more of those local aspirations. We also need to do a quantitative assessment and look at what our streets and our people are telling us. So there'll be a whole set of data collection that's done, and we'll also use that to look ahead to the future and think about future scenarios and how we need to link that to emerging transport trends. That will be accompanied by an engagement and consultation plan. This process will take quite a long time when we're going back to the community a number of times, so need to make sure that we're telling a story as we go along, rather than people feeling like it's a new request each time. The second stage from that establishing the context is building consensus. So taking the work that we've done and taking it out to the people, we'll distill the baseline report into an issues, learnings and opportunities paper, and start the preparation of our integrated sustainability assessment. And those two will go out to the community to have a conversation around, this is what we think is happening locally. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have we got things right, or are we heading in the wrong direction? Obviously, after that stage, we need to reflect what people have said within the baseline report. So we'll update the baseline report, prepare a engagement summary, and then really focus on producing our vision, objectives, and principles. And we'll do that through some targeted work, whether that's workshops through our local area partnerships, EAPs like this, or other partnerships that we have to develop that future look forward. So from our vision and objectives, we move on to our policies and what policies will help to deliver that. We'll do some policy analysis to see how things play together as a mix of policies, and we'll do that through a policy monitor and evaluation framework. And that will be accompanied by the next stage of our ISA. Sorry, my computer's just told me it's not liking me. And then we'll go out to the community again to talk about these are the policies that we've developed, these is how that we think they'll meet the vision and objectives that we set. What do you think about that? Sorry, it's not moving on because it says my Wi-Fi's gone off. It was going so well. It's not kicking in. Should I just keep talking or should I try and reconnect it? Rescue? Oh, okay. If you've got, there's a copy of the presentation within your pack. Is that all right if I keep going using the old school method? So we're up to 5, which is forming the LTP. So we've done a lot of work at this stage to find the context, take that to the community, get some buy-in to that's where we're going. We've developed our policies, we've analysed them, and now comes the somewhat tricky bit, is looking at what initiatives, what infrastructure investments will help to deliver those policies. So there's a piece of work to look at known and new infrastructure options, to think about what will help to deliver the LTP, to run them through an evaluation framework, and to, with that, pull together a succinct roadmap of where we're going. With the policies and the projects, we can then start to complete the impact assessment and then go to a full consultation on the LTP as a whole document. From that, we move to the final stage, which is agreeing the plan, which is essentially finalising all the work, reflecting what people have said, and taking it forward through to an adoption. So the challenging bit is the timeline. So this is the last slide. As I said, we're still waiting on the DFT guidance, and that may somewhat change this timeline. So it's set out here as indicative, but the aim is that the first piece of work happens this summer as the Learning Issues and Opportunities paper, that in the winter we'll go out to the public again on our transport policies, and then next spring we'll go out to the full consultation on the LTP and look at adoption in the autumn of 2024. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of where we're going, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, the word sustainable comes through this document all the time, and obviously everything we do has to be realistic and viable within the funding envelopes we have, and so we might have all the weird and wonderful ideas in the world, but if we can't afford them. So, Councillor Mercer, you were first with a question.
Thank you, Chair. Politics and policies are all about options and alternatives. We haven't got infinite money. In fact, we've got a very restricted amount of money. Therefore, the big questions that we'll be asking will be which options are viable in which combination, and which options will the general public most be happy with. So it will be a case of saying to people, you can have this or you can have that. You can't have both unless, that is, we cut some other aspect of council services, which is exceedingly unlikely. So what I'd be looking forward to seeing at an early stage is some sort of indication of what the options are, so that we can talk to our electorate, the voters, and say, well, you can have that, but if you have that, you're not having that. And we need to be able to give the people who are going to be affected, if you like, the stakeholders, those comparisons. Now, normally people make things so confusing that the stakeholders don't realise that they're actually making a choice. They say, would you like so-and-so? And they say, yes. They don't get told they're going to lose so-and-so as a consequence. So we need to find some way of making it clear to people what they're actually going to either gain or lose when they indicate what they want to hear and what they want to have. That's a very high-level comment, but I think this is a high-level stage, Chair.
I think on slide 5 it talks about prioritising, and obviously what this isn't about is we're going to put a zebra crossing here and a pelican crossing there. So, you know, did you want to add to that?
I mean, it's a very valid point, and it's a challenge that we'll have to face. I think what we have at the heart of this work is working with the community and giving them the information that they need to make those decisions around priorities. So absolutely agree with what you're saying, and it's something that we'll take away and think how we can bring more profile to.
Councillor Allibone was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I noticed the Transport Act 2020 is talking about 5-year plans, but that must have superseded the previous incarnation, because if we're working on a 2012 plan, that's 11 years old, so that's somewhat out of date now.
Yes, that's correct. It's somewhat out of date, and that's why there is the need, and that's why you've seen other authorities progress their LTPs to full adoption without having had the DFT guidance, because they've felt that they've needed that confidence. But we, like many others, have waited for the government and the DFT to provide that detail. But it is a challenge for us now, and hopefully this piece of work, even though it is around a 5-year time slot, hopefully it will put us in good stead for a much longer time period. So when it does come time to renew this emerging LTP, then the people sitting in this chair will be in a better position to do so.
Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit of plea, really. Obviously, we have to lots of tick boxes and lots of approvals to get through. Obviously, quite rightly, obviously with the corporate plan and carbon reduction and moving forward in relation to things. But I've had with the last one, I mean, I used to represent an authority that had 42 parishes, you know, very rural. And, you know, this is a criticism, but I thought the last one seemed to be quite a bit Northampton-centric in relation to getting past DFT and the public transport that isn't and wasn't there, and just a plea for maybe when we develop this one, chairs, there's a bit of realism in, you know, the rural authority that we are. I fully appreciating the hoops and the departments we'll have to get through to get it passed, but it'd be nice, you know, it just, from my point of view, it'd be just more realistic in the rural there we are, and the understanding or not from the government departments in that relationship, because, you know, it's still very, very difficult, and I've been, I think, through 2 or 3 of these. Still very difficult and actually impossible in parts of North Northampton. I'm sure everybody in this room is aware of actually, you know, getting a bus from one place to another. And that's obviously only one part of the LTP, but I think it's a big part of it. And yeah, just a bit of realism, hopefully.
Thank you, and I think that's a really useful and directional point. I think it's something that our region has been struggling with how to manage the rural areas. So thank you. We'll give it some more thought, and when we come back in future, we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Okay, We've got a question from the screen. Councillor Buckingham, if you can unmute.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to join you at the moment. Thank you. My question is around what we want from North Northampton in terms of employment, in terms of tourism, in terms of things like that, because our roads are getting clogged up with obviously our main employment is coming out of warehousing.
Excuse me, sorry to speak over you, Councillor. We're struggling to hear the actual question, I'm afraid. You're breaking up a bit. There's some interference.
I don't know why that is. So hang on a minute. See if I can get the Is that any better?
Much.
Thank you. That's a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I had my headphones on the wrong way. So the main employment is warehousing. A lot of heavy goods vehicles moving in and out of the region. And it's getting that balance right of employment and tourism, because we want to do the tourism bit. So I'm hoping that that will be fully explored within the documents. Thank you.
I mean, it's a very simple yes. We'll work hard to assess those issues that you raise, and with the emerging tourism strategy, that was something that we'll try and pick up as well.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the previous local transport plan, that was for the whole of the county of Northamptonshire. And as was pointed out by my colleague, there was an overemphasis in our opinion, on the dominant urban area of Northampton. We are now separated from that dominant urban area. What degree of coordination will there need to be between our local transport plan and the adjacent ones, such as Peterborough, Bedford, West Northants? Now, I know that in most of these areas there's a duty to cooperate, and I would expect there to be so here, but that duty to cooperate is normally enforced, if you like, by having a public inquiry with a government-appointed inspector going through the proposed plans and verifying that it meets the statutory requirements. I didn't see any such stage in this process. Will there be one?
So it's developed under the Transport Act, not the Town and Country Planning Act, so therefore we don't have that formal duty to cooperate in terms of working with our neighbouring areas. Obviously, EEH as our sub-regional transport body is a body that we coordinate through, and also we have their plans that we can reference to for coordination. What we have seen with some of the other authorities that have already progressed the LTP and are at consultation or at the final stages of adoption, it is more an engaged approach or a consultative approach rather than any challenging. If there are specific issues that represent a challenge, then be grateful to have those identified.
I would just say that one of the things we do is work through the Sub-Regional Transport Board with England's Economic Heartland, who are very useful in terms of evidence and coordinating matters between the various, I think there's about 9-10 authorities within that, so that's one thing we will be able to use. Sorry, you want to come back?
Yeah. Since there won't be anything equivalent to an inspection by the inspectorate, there won't be any list of major modifications that will be imposed upon the authority on these matters. However, there will be issues where we, shall we say, will have disagreements with our neighbours. Now, one particular issue that was hinted at is the fact that Northamptonshire is in the absolute centre of the country. In fact, the furthest point from the sea anywhere in the UK is in this unitary. And the consequence of this is that there is an awful lot of heavy goods traffic that goes through us. We have, as someone pointed out, lots of warehouses because of our location. But the damage to the road, as I'm sure you know, is proportional to the fourth power of the axle weight. And our roads get churned up and worn out faster than the roads of an equivalent road in an area that wasn't on the main transport links. Now, the government traditionally tries to control the transport system by the tax system. So they wanted to de-emphasise diesel, so they put the tax up for diesel fuel higher than the tax for petrol. But we're now starting to see the use of various forms of road pricing, such as the ULEZ system in London. Would it be possible to consider anything equivalent for heavy goods traffic passing through Northamptonshire, given that it A, produces the highest proportion of pollution because it's using diesel with particulates, large amount of carbon dioxide, and secondly, the worst damage to our roads and therefore to our highways budget. So, would it be possible to consider, will the legislation allow us to consider any form of road pricing as part of our LTP for heavy vehicles that are not registered locally?
I'm going to try and answer your question by answering a slightly different question, which I appreciate might not get you to where you want to be. This document has to go to the DfT and ultimately it goes to the Secretary of State for them to approve. So therefore, within the document, we need to have things that they're mindful to agree with. And I think that having a network that is somewhat segmented by charging would be a very challenging thing for them to look at. So that would be, I think, a very difficult thing to do. If that's something that we need to cross off or to look at, then we can do that. But I'm not conscious that we'll be able to do it. If you'd like to.
So I can probably, because I'm Chris Ragg, Head of Strategic Transport. I'm just for, there is legislation that would allow us to introduce a road pricing scheme. That is something you could not effectively do unless such a scheme was outlined in your local transport plan. You wouldn't, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't pass the tests. It is one of those pieces of legislation that is, shall we say, very laborious to actually implement. We did start to look at it some years ago when we had the Milton Keynes South Midlands partnership and we were looking at doing something across a wide area, because it's one of those issues where if you do something on your own, you may just say, well, people, I won't go there, I'll go there instead. And that's why those things are very complicated. But it's one of those things that has been very little used and tested, that legislation. And it would be a major issue to implement it, not least because, of course, the roads that bring a lot of the heavy traffic into Northamptonshire are not our roads. They're the Secretary of State's roads through national highways. So it is but the practicality of also, we'd have to check of whether it would actually really allow you to do something that was just aimed at HGVs rather than general traffic. Because the legislation was much more framed at doing things like the congestion charging zone in London, where it intrinsically affects all vehicles. There are things like low emission zones that, so it is, but it is, it's another more detailed piece of work.
The reason I raised it in the way I did is because the HGVs are disproportionately contributing to global warming, to pollution, etc. I would not expect us to be able to put into the local transport plan a specific plan to do it, because as you pointed out, it is a significant piece of work. It would need liaison with our neighbours, which is why I raised the question about duty to cooperate with neighbours in the first place. And it would take some time, and it would need coordination with the Department of Transport, who would perhaps see it as a pilot if we're lucky. However, if we put a clause somewhere in the local transport plan saying that we might look into a form of road pricing for HGVs travelling through our area, and do it in such a way as to not preclude us from introducing a policy like that at some point in the future, that would be helpful. Not to put the policy there, but to start building a policy framework.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously one of the options that, as we've talked about options in the wider sense, it is one of those things that can be looked at.
Thank you. I mean, it's all useful comment, and that's exactly what we're here for, to put suggestions in, to see how they go. I mean, I can see a number of issues, but I can see the issue of the road maintenance as well, very much. Any other questions from, Councillor North?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one again. I think, as everybody knows, the 106 system is finally being overhauled and being replaced, supposedly, across the country. Can we, or would we be able to, timing-wise, use this document as a leverage in relation to our infrastructure needs and link that in through the replacement of the future 106 system? So, we actually, linking to what Councillor Mercer says, actually get some comeback in relation to the infrastructure use that's being used by vehicles, and actually justify that investment via different means.
Short answer is yes. That's one of the primary purposes. Yeah.
So it would form part of the evidence base when you're trying to negotiate with developers, I'm sure. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for the presentation, and good luck with the with formulating the plan. And let's hope we get the guidelines soon so that we can crack on. So we move to the next section, which is the car parking strategy, and we've got Mrs. Phillipson on the line, and also the consultant, who I'm sure she'll introduce. So you want to carry on?
Yep, I'm Victoria Phillipson. I'm the head of capital projects, and I'm working with Jonathan Waterworth to develop the car parking strategy. We've appointed 2020, the company 2020, to write the car parking strategy. So Adam Bunce is with us today to give us a presentation to set out the process we're going to follow on the car parking strategy. So I will hand over to Adam to go through the presentation.
Thank you, Victoria, and good afternoon, councillors and officers. I'll just share my screen. The purpose of this session is just to sort of provide an overview as to where we're at, most notably because we are hopefully shortly to be starting a consultation. So what I will do is I'll start from the beginning. I will not be able to see any hands raised or any questions, so maybe if we can save those to the end, I can always flick back to a slide if there's a particular slide that there is an interest in. So there is a few slides to cover, and they cover a few different aspects. So I'll start with the strategy scope, structure and key milestones. We have been commissioned to develop a car parking strategy that will cover all Northamptonshire Council car parks, as well as the on-street parking provision across the authority. That on-street parking provision will sort of focus more around sort of the areas of parking controls or where we may need parking controls. Obviously, there are greater challenges in terms of sort of trying to identify extents on street compared to what you can achieve with off-street car parks. With the off-street car parks, the strategy doesn't include privately owned car parks. So superstores, the privately owned car park that we have in Kettering, for instance, because we need to sort of be able to, in effect, influence what we're trying to achieve. The car park strategy will be produced at a strategic level. It's not designed to go into the minute detail, in effect, so we're not necessarily looking at identifying specific matters in Corby, Kettering, etc. The idea will be that we focus this at a strategic level, and once adopted, we then apply the strategy at a local level. So it's identifying what we can take from the strategy and apply into what locations across the authority. The outputs will be a series of objectives and policies. The policies will include interventions that we can, in effect, action immediately, and those that will require further development. Examples of policies that will require further development could be sort of around EV infrastructure, it could be around permit schemes. The strategy, in effect, can't go into that level of detail. So if you take permit schemes as an example, the need for specific consultation to go into sort of the details that would include specific streets that would be or may not be included in the scheme, etc., would be too much detail to include in a wide-ranging strategy that covers the entire authority. The purpose is to develop a strategy that is, in effect, is a framework, and it provides a 20-year action plan that enables sort of decision making and an evidence base that sort of supports approaches and schemes that the council decide to take over that 20-year period, and the policies in effect allow those sort of decisions to be made with the appropriate justification. As touched on in the previous presentation, the local transport plan would sort of sit in the top of the sort of the transport hierarchy. The parking strategy could be considered sort of one of those daughter documents that you may see in addition to other strategies that could include active travel, road safety, public transport, etc. And then sort of what falls out of the parking strategy could be additional sort of pieces of work, EV infrastructure strategy, which I believe is in train at the moment. Other examples could be around sort of car park signage, and more specific studies and reviews that need to go into those more sort of detailed locations. Just touching on the sort of the key milestones. So in terms of where we are now, as I said at the start, we are looking to commence an initial engagement opportunity that we are shortly to commence. So we're probably looking at sort of this month, hopefully having that, and that will be sort of a fact-finding opportunity for us. In the background, in the work that we've been doing to date, we've been doing various assessments, we've been collecting data that allows us to make a certain amount of assumptions. This stage one sort of engagement opportunity allows us to, in effect, hopefully gain that confidence that what we've collected is in line with what stakeholders believe is the case. So that is a stage one consultation. We will analyse all that feedback. We will create a report that provides that feedback that is available for the public domain, and then that sort of takes us through to early July, when we'll be submitting the parking study report, which is the first of the two sort of documents that will be produced as part of this exercise. Once the study report has been finalised, which is in effect providing all the evidence and data, we can then start to finalise the draft parking strategy. So that'll be where we are outlining objectives, outlining the policy, and very much the sort of the action plan that allows us to focus our attention on that sort of 20-year period. We then look to commence a stage two stakeholder engagement exercise, and that will be very much focused on the draft strategy. Now, falling out of that will be a series of policies that will be split under the objectives, and this consultation exercise will allow us to go out and ask for feedback on each particular one, asking for sort of specific feedback ranging from sort of strongly support through to strongly oppose. That will be a robust process to ensure that we have the opportunity to consult with everyone, and that will be supported with a series of what we call road shows, where we'll actually go out to visit local venues across the authority. I will touch a little bit more on consultation in another slide. So moving on from that, once the consultation is complete, we will be looking to finalise the parking strategy, which we hope to be sort of achieving around October time, and then we can then provide Northants with the appropriate support through sort of committee processes to get that strategy adopted. So that does lead on to the sort of the specific work around stakeholder engagement. As I sort of touched on, we're looking to deliver a two-stage consultation process. And again, sort of as I've touched on there, stage one being that sort of fact-finding opportunity, and stage two very much focusing on the draft strategy itself. The stage one engagement will sort of focus on virtual workshops with targeted stakeholders that we're just sort of drawing together at the moment. And the stage two will involve the opportunity for targeted stakeholders to have their say prior to going out to the wider public, which will be supplemented with those roadshow events. And we anticipate visiting each location at least that has a council-owned car park, and we will do some mapping work around that to make sure that there is no area within the authority that there will be a tremendous amount of travel time to gain access to the local venues. If there is, then we can obviously provide some additional venues to go and visit. So a key aspect of the work that we've been doing to date has been around car parking surveys. In terms of our methodology, we carried out those in March of this year, and March is considered to be a sort of a neutral month in terms of no unusual traffic patterns, i.e. sort of the lead up to Christmas or the summer holidays. We visited car parks across each of the main towns where there's car parks, and surveys were undertaken on both weekdays, Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday, and also on a Saturday, just to understand the difference in parking behaviours on weekdays in comparison to the weekends. And those surveys were undertaken at different times of the day, 10, 12, 2 and 4, just to understand sort of the duration of stay and how parking changes through the course of a day. I've now got sort of a few slides that just runs through the key headlines of that data. This first set that you can see is the occupancy on weekdays, and that shows that actually across some of the towns, the demand in car parks is actually very high already. There isn't a hard and fast rule in terms of where sort of the optimum capacity should be for car parks, but anecdotally, we sort of expect it to be around the sort of 60 to 70% mark, ideally, just because that allows future growth to occur without that impacting the demand. So as you can see, in terms of one town in particular, in Desborough, there is a significant demand. Now, that is in part due to the fact there are 2 car parks in Desborough, both relatively small, and predominantly focused on being for residential parking, with some informal signage that sort of creates that impression. Although having spoken to some of the residents in and around that area, we believe it's certainly not the case that is what happens. In other locations, some of the sort of the larger towns such as Corby and Kettering, there is less demand, whereas in other locations such as Wellingborough, the demand is very low. If we compare that to a Saturday, it makes interesting reading, though, although there are in certain aspects where the demand is higher. Generally speaking, if I sort of change the slides to show you sort of weekday in comparison to the Saturday, you'll notice there is a slight reduction. Now, this is an emerging finding that we've noticed in carrying out parking studies and strategies across the country in the last sort of year or so, that post-pandemic, there seems to be a greater shift towards higher demand on weekdays in comparison to Saturdays, whereas pre-pandemic, what we noticed was Saturdays was generally much higher than weekdays. So that's an area that we're sort of exploring in a little bit more detail at the moment to understand sort of what may be the cause and driver of that. So just to sort of identify that fluctuation, the figures that you can see above the line represent where it is higher on a Saturday, and the figures below the 0 line represent where it's higher on a weekday. So there's clear to be a much higher demand on the weekdays compared to a Saturday. What we have done is, while looking at all car parks across the authority, we have identified a sort of a clear split between the types of car park. There's the traditional town centre car parks that are located near sort of the key town centre facilities, your high streets, your train stations, etc. And there is also car parks that are located away from the town centres. So these next two slides provide that comparison. So these are looking at sort of town centre specific car parks where you can see the demand is very high. If we then compare that to what we classify as sort of more residential amenity car parks, the the demand does drop off sort of quite substantially. In some locations, such as Frapston and Burton Latimer, what you will see is they are listed twice. There is two car parks there, one of which is sort of more town centre to focus, whereas in the other locations, they're more probably sort of amenity and potentially residential. And there is a sharp drop off. And again, looking at that fluctuation, the figures above the line represent the sort of the town centre focus demand, and the figures below the zero represent where the demand is higher in sort of residential areas, which demonstrates that, as you would expect, those sort of core town centre locations, the demand is much higher. Comparing the car parks that charge against those that do not also makes for some interesting sort of interpretation. The car parks to the left of the screen represent those that are non-chargeable, and in Corby and Kettering, the two locations where there are parking charges, the demand is generally slightly lower than what it is apart from Wellingborough, which is, as we've already touched on, much lower. And I'll come on to sort of the reasons why that's the case sort of in the summary. By doing the surveys across different times of the day, it allows us to understand how long vehicles are staying in car parks, which allows us to sort of gain an understanding of what type of users there are. Generally speaking, if users are present for sort of 0 to 2 hours, we expect that to be visitors to the area that are likely to be sort of fairly local. More sort of 2 to 4 hour visits are potentially visitors that are slightly further afield, potentially that are sort of going for day visits as opposed to sort of short-term visits. And then as you sort of get out to the longer sort of 4 to 6 and 6 hour plus visits, we expect those to potentially be people that are working in the area. You generally expect to see the highest number sort of in the 0 to 2 category, and then that reduces through each of the categories, with the exception of the 6 hour plus, because there is the potential to take in a longer period of time that can be at a high demand there. And very much in the town centre car parks, you will see that demand for 0 to 2 hour is significantly greater than the others. If we compare those car parks to that of the sort of the more residential amenity focused category, then you'll see that the demand for 6 hour plus becomes much higher. And that is in line with what you would expect certainly with residential, where people may actually not be going out all day or maybe sort of going out for short time visits and then sort of being back before those surveys are undertaken. The final sort of set of data comparison that we're looking at here is just in relation to chargeable and non-chargeable car parks and the length of stay. Interestingly, those that don't charge have a slightly higher number of parking acts occurring in the 0 to 2 hour category, whereas the longer parking acts then become more slightly in the case of 2 to 4 and 4 to 6, slightly more for chargeable. Although the 6 hour plus, we should make reference, being the sort of includes Corby rail station, which is a car park that is in high demand on weekdays due to potentially sort of commuters travelling elsewhere. So just touching on those headlines, as I mentioned, Wellingborough seems to have much lower demand compared to the other towns. The most likely reason for that is that there's substantially more parking spaces in Wellingborough. In fact, 39% of the total supply in the authority is actually located there, so to far more spaces. Outside of that, Corby probably has the next lowest at sort of an average peak of 58%, and this is sort of taking the figures as a collective, as a town. We should note that there are certain car parks that do have higher levels of demand than others. Desborough has the highest demand on weekdays and Saturdays, peaking at 96 and 98% respectively. And as I said, that's likely due to the fact that there is severely limited parking in place for the town. We've touched on the demand being higher on weekdays in relation to Saturdays. We've also touched on peak demand being in town centres in relation to more sort of residential, both of which that demand sort of occurs around sort of 12 o'clock noon, which is what we'd expect. Another key aspect of the parking strategy is to understand the potential growth in car parks, and that by calculating that, we can understand whether or not there becomes a point where there may not be enough demand for the car park to serve its local purpose. We calculate the future growth by using a tool called Tempro, which is a tool developed by the Department of Transport. It takes on a range of factors. It takes on the known developments that's occurring in local areas. It also takes on various other factors such as car ownership, origin and destination data, and that provides you with a set of growth figures. And to utilise the growth, all you need is to supply baseline figures to in effect calculate that forecast. So utilising our parking surveys as that baseline, that allows us to understand what potentially could occur in car parks over the course of the strategy's 20-year lifespan. And just to make a note, when I say 20 years, we don't expect this to be a document that will sit there for 20 years not doing anything. There will be very much a need to update this on a frequent basis, and traditionally we sort of advise around every sort of 5 years is a good time to revisit that, just to sort of understand how the sort of the parking environment's changed and what's occurring in terms of demand in your car parks. Breaking down the sort of the growth into 5-year intervals allows us to sort of understand what's likely to occur. Now, generally speaking, around 85% capacity is where we expect to see potentially issues with parking occurring. And that is because the spaces that may be available could be priority spaces, so could be disabled, for instance. It could be in some car parks that those spaces are smaller than sort of traditional spaces may be, so larger cars may struggle. And in larger car parks, if a car park is 85% full, actually just finding a space can become challenging in itself. So where we are at the moment, again, sort of looking at collectively combining the towns together, there are a couple of 3 car parks in particular that sort of showing that sign of being above the 85% threshold. Desborough, which is taking the peak data, is peaking at 100% already. Frapston and Rushton as being those that are above, with some car parks, notably Corby and Burton Latimer, they're sort of heading towards that threshold. As we start to move out, you'll see that growth increases. And if we go all the way out to 2043, we're at a point where potentially 3 towns may be having demand that is above the availability of spaces. And where we have sort of 120%, what we're saying there in effect is that 20% of demand cannot park. So there's every likelihood that without intervention, they may be going to other locations, which could impact local economies. What it also shows out to 2043 is that all but one location, Wellingborough, is experiencing demand above that 85% threshold. Now, that doesn't mean to say we need to sort of start considering the supply of additional car parks or the supply of additional parking spaces. What is keen for us is to try to reduce that demand by providing integration with sustainable transport. So that could be sort of active travel, that could be sort of public transport. And that is very much sort of key objectives for us in terms of developing this parking strategy. So that sort of covers the presentation in terms of sort of what we've been doing to date. As I touched on, sort of we're now looking at sort of developing those objectives and the sort of the policies around those objectives, and that will be having a heavy focus on the sort of the sustainability side of things, reducing sort of carbon targets in line with what the council are working to, in addition to sort of acknowledging that we need to be mindful of the technology that's going to change and potentially what may come out of that being sort of the micro mobility, the smart parking, and what impact that can have on town centres. That's a piece of work that we're sort of just moving to now. and no doubt I can come back and sort of speak to you again once we sort of get to that point where we've actually started developing that in advance of that sort of stage 2 parking strategy. But that's everything I want to cover as part of this strategy, and happy to sort of hand over to any questions now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Have any councillors got a question? Councillor Mercer.
Afraid got quite a few here. Right, the first one is, you referred to stakeholders. What do you define as the stakeholders?
So what we define is everyone that would have an impact on parking. So that would include local members, town and parish councils, business and organisation groups, activity groups, as well as sort of the wider public. What we are anticipating doing is, in the stage 1 consultation, will be to produce a questionnaire which will be made available to everyone to complete, and that will be publicised through the channels that we have available through the council. Supporting that will be a series of workshops that will be targeted focus. So we will invite local members, the parish and town councils, and other groups that we identify to, and that will allow us to provide sort of a similar presentation to this, just to provide that sort of update. Once we move forward to the stage 2 consultation, we will speak to targeted stakeholders again sort of before starting that consultation, and then once we get out to the wider consultation, there'll be another survey which will be focused on the sort of the key policies from the parking strategy, and that will be what is supplemented with the road shows, where we go out to local towns and potentially villages, and actually just allow interested bodies to come along and speak to us and find out more about what the parking strategy entails and what their specific sort of preferences and demands would be.
I thought, all right. Next one I've got is the interaction between the strategy and the private car parks, of which there are a number, plus the car parks that are owned by parish and town councils, which in some of the smaller towns are dominant. What will the interrelationship between those two areas be?
So the reason we are exploring council-owned car parks as part of this strategy is because we are looking at sort of identifying those that we have the ability to influence and to control. The relationships are vitally important, because we acknowledge that whilst this strategy may only be covering council-owned car parks, the impact of those car parks is going to be sort of going to be acknowledged throughout the towns and across the authority. So they will be stakeholders in terms of this project. We will be keen to speak to them to understand sort of what particular work they're doing, to understand if there's anything that we can feed into as part of the strategy, and to ensure that it's not that there's no sort of work that's going on in the background that could sort of compromise or contradict what we're doing. So in terms of sort of the privately owned operators and car parks that are owned by the towns and parish councils, there will be stakeholders that we sort of look to engage with throughout the development of the parking strategy.
So what you mean is that they will still be able, private car park owners and the towns and parish councils, to have their own parking policies on their own car parks, and that the parking strategy will not impose policies or duties on them. Is that what you're saying?
I think it would be important to sort of understand the potential difference. I think with town and parish councils, potentially there may be an opportunity sort of to elaborate in terms of what is achieved in terms of policy, and to complement what's done with the parking strategy. With private operators, so supermarkets and the car park that we have in Kettering, that becomes a lot more challenging and is probably potentially difficult to achieve. If there is opportunity for collaboration that could see some sort of relationships built where policies could be replicated, then obviously that would be beneficial to the council and to our parking strategy. But the privately owned ones will be much more challenging to sort of get to a point where we can have that consistent approach, just because in effect we cannot influence what they are doing. through the engagement piece that we will be doing with them, we can understand hopefully what they are attempting to achieve and what their sort of aspirations are with parking, just to make sure that there's nothing that they are looking to achieve that could be become challenging for us in terms of our parking strategy. But because of the inability for us to influence what they are doing on a day-to-day basis, I think there will be more limitations there than what potentially there could be with town and parish owned car parks at least.
Okay, can I carry on, Chair? All right, well, the next one, this is perhaps slightly peripheral. In some of our towns, we have had a problem with excessive numbers of flats being given planning consent, and whenever the application comes before the committee, it's pointed out that the application does not include adequate parking provision. The response of the inspectors is usually, they can use the unitary council's car parks and park there instead. So in effect, they are being used for overnight parking in many cases to allow flats that would otherwise not be granted planning consent to be granted planning consent. If we're going to produce a strategy as the type that seems to be implied, what effect will that have on the overnight parking of people who've bought flats on the assumption that they can park in the council's car parks overnight?
So the opportunity for us to influence parking behaviours in car parks is governed by, in effect, the measures in place in the traffic regulation orders. So in effect, if we've identified a need to try and prevent that, then there's an opportunity to try to update traffic regulation orders to prevent that. However, I think what's more important to try and achieve in this piece of work, certainly in terms of moving forward with future developments that's coming online, is just to make sure the appropriate sort of robust processes are in place to try and prevent that from happening, which is going to likely lead to excessive demand occurring, which then leads to overspills and the potential impacts that can have in terms of parking in inappropriate places, and also preventing visitors from coming to the towns if the car parks are full sort of outside of sort of overnight. So what we can achieve there is by having policies in place where we make sure that there is that sort of joined up relationships between the appropriate departments. We can stipulate that as part of the planning process, it's vitally important that if developers are coming on board with applications, that the appropriate surveys are in place, and by that the developers should be undertaking what's called parking beat surveys, where they're identifying the amount of availability of parking in an area, certainly on street, and potentially you can explore sort of off street as well. And what that will do is that will identify how much parking is available. And if there is not enough parking available in those areas, then in effect that planning permission should not be granted until the planning officers are content that the appropriate mitigation measures are in place. So that could be that there is additional parking provided in the development, or the development is potentially reduced in terms of sort of how much is being provided to ensure that then that space can be allocated appropriately. We don't want to go against the work that is coming forward in terms of sort of promoting active travel and sustainability in terms of developments, and what's included in the LTM 120 guidance, which is an excellent piece of work in terms of trying to promote sort of active travel as a more viable sort of transport mode. But I think we have to also acknowledge that there is a risk that it can go too far in the other direction, and then we have that consequence occurring. So I think it's just making sure that there is policy in place that ensures that sort of joined up work is done within local council departments, and the appropriate evidence is in place to ensure that those assessments are carried out before planning permissions are granted.
I'm just a little bit concerned that we've got 4 more items and time's pressing, so we can make the questions and the answers a bit more succinct in places. That'd be grateful. If you've
I'm
got
trying to make my question succinct.
Yeah.
I think that wasn't fully understood properly there. What I was not talking about was future planning applications. I'm talking about all of the consents that have been given in the past where there are rows of flats where their only parking capacity is in the council's car parks and they park overnight, which admittedly is a major problem for the night economy. But if we make it more difficult to park overnight, what happens to all the people who bought their flats on the assumption that they could?
It's a challenging situation, and I appreciate that we're out of time. So I'm more than happy if you want to sort of take this offline. I'm more than happy to have another conversation with you. But in effect, it's possible to put in parking controls that will prevent that. But yes, there will be a consequence of that, and there will almost certainly be a level of displacement, and then it's managing that displacement to avoid just moving the situation from one area to another. So it's a challenging, delicate matter that will probably need to be sort of looked at in detail. And if there are specific locations, then we can certainly sort of explore that just to sort of better understand sort of what the existing situation is. So yeah, I'm more than happy to pick that up outside of this meeting if that's helpful with you.
I'm happy to pick it up outside the meeting, but I feel we may have a problem that we don't have a solution to.
I'm not sure we're looking to make it more difficult to use our car parks, but anyway, Councillor Buckingham, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you very much. My question is around disabled parking. I'm presuming that you'll be harmonising prices across the district. Want to make a plea for if disabled parking is going to be charged at the same rate, whether or not it could be allowed for extra time, because obviously getting wheelchairs in and out of cars, getting people in and out of cars, not just in and out of cars in car parking, but around the shops as well, where the disabled are more disadvantaged. So it's just a plea for, if you're harmonising, can we have longer time to take into account people's needs? Thank you.
I'll step in there, Councillor Buckingham. There's no intention necessarily to harmonise. Parking must reflect the local needs and wants and the local aspirations and other drivers, such as other local car parks and other providers in the area. So there's no suggestion that it will necessarily be exactly harmonised across the whole authority, as it isn't now. But of course, we'll take into account the needs of this blue badge holders. As you know, Laura is one herself, so I know fully well what the requirements are. So, but that will be taken into account. Any other councillors? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Adam, for your presentation. I don't think we've had the slides, but they can be circulated, and at some point. And we obviously look forward to having the opportunity to take part in the stakeholder consultations, and that will be open to everybody to do so. Okay. Thank you very much. Then the next item is the leasehold management policy, and Mrs. Crowley's on there. There we are. Suddenly appears on the big screen.
It's going to be me instead, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Poor substitute. So I'm Rob Mills, so I work in Edwina's team, and I'm the commercial estates manager. So I'm just going to share with you the presentation. Hopefully I don't have any issues with Wi-Fi. So from the beginning, there we go. So just to introduce it first of all, so the council is required to have adequate checks and processes for the grant of leasehold interest in land. So this presentation will outline the current situation. It will also give ideas of a unified policy and processes regulating the granting of leases going forwards. So EAP are obviously invited to comment on the proposals. So if we have a look at the background, so the council owns a number of properties, as you're aware, a variety of reasons, but ultimately to ensure that they contribute to the corporate plan or carbon reduction commitment. Now, we lease some of those properties for our own benefit, but also ones that we own, we lease out to others, those that we have freehold control of. So leases may be granted for various reasons. Firstly, lettings for commercial or non-commercial tenants, to grant terms in return of social, environmental or economic reasons, or to earn revenue. So the earning revenue is obviously the investment estate. Agreements also can take place in other forms, such as rights over land to provide service runs, such as easements and wayleaves. So think about Western Power Distribution crossing our land with power cables, things like that. Agreements can be short-term licenses or long-term leases, and agreements can be protected by statute. So, for example, the 1954 Landlord Tenant Act, which can produce security of tenure for some of those leases. So the current situation, sorry, that's, where are we? Introduction. It's because I've turned my page over, there we go. So the asset management team is what we want, isn't it? Where are we? There we go. So the council employs surveyors who are specialists in leasehold negotiations, so this is currently the case, to ensure that agreements meet the council's service needs. So, for instance, making sure that those leases have the terms in them that are required. Leases can be very complicated. They can you need to read the whole lease, so it's important to know that everything is detailed correctly in there. The ongoing management needs have been considered, including revenue costs. So it could be that there's very onerous terms or clauses in that lease that we need to know about. We also are involved in monitoring the markets to provide expert opinions to assist in the setting of terms, so thinking about market value, how the market values that property, and making sure that we meet that. The opportunities to ensure marketing in accordance with legal and constitutional requirements. We need to make sure we've shown that we're trying to get best value, so that's something the surveyors do. They're supporting the recovery of sites, including debt recovery. So we help collect debt, but also make sure that we do it according to the lease. Same with regards to taking property back. Hold accurate records and advise upon and pursue any tenants for breach of contractual terms within that lease. And they provide also annual statutory capital finance function to the finance. So that's asset valuations. We have to provide a valuation so that we know how much our assets are worth each year to this finance. Now the current situation. So legacy councils have different approaches to leasehold management in the past. Some services taking the lead, others are using a corporate landlord approach to support this service delivery. The Constitution and supporting governance documents are not quite sufficient at the moment to mitigate all the risks. The process isn't clear at present. The recent adopted disposal policy requires longer-term leases where there's an element of strategic choice to be reviewed by the Asset Management Review Group, but there are some situations where it doesn't go through this group. So again, some of these leases are maybe being missed out from this group. And I actually had a recent audit on lettings, and that pointed out that really there needs to be a unified approach, because there were some agreements being agreed outside of the asset management team and outside of that expertise. So the current constitution, the Chief Officer Delegated for Assets is the Executive Director of Place and Economy. He's here for us today, George. And their responsibilities include policy, process and maintenance of asset records. The Constitution also delegates some authority to corporate leadership team for lease approvals. But these approvals are caveated in the Constitution. So if you look at it as a whole, again, there are different parts of that Constitution which caveat it to make sure that a process is followed. However, it's not clear, they're not in the same place, so it can be misinterpreted. So the risks are what come up next. So the current situation leads to these risks. Contracts being created that commit the council to obligations which are not fully considered. So again, terms within that lease that may become onerous later on. The council not adopting a corporate approach to asset management, so not having that unified approach. Risks of challenge if opportunities are not marketed, which could lead to judicial review. So not following that process, we could be open to challenge. Support services such as finance, legal and assets not factoring in increased management costs created by lettings into their service plans, leading to poor service delivery levels and increased complaints. So this is basically because some terms can become onerous. We have a lot to do, maybe not the time or the officers to keep up with that work or even the budget, and therefore it involves further complaints down the line. Leased in properties and lease renewals may not have the higher levels of EPC. So it might be that we agree to lease a property that doesn't have a good EPC. So in the future, it brings a risk to our carbon targets. Service agreements are also being granted instead of leases where occupier has exclusive use of an area. And this is really quite dangerous because it means that we can't then have control of that situation. They get control of their premises. And also risks of unplanned expenditure not provided for the medium-term financial plan, maybe because we don't realise what's in the detail behind that lease or that agreement. So the options, one, to change the Constitution to limit office delegation authority to the Chief Responsible Officer only. The other option would be to document a policy which is a guide for the council. So we could do either or both. With regard to the policy that is being suggested, so the policy will link the asset strategy and confirm the process for member involvement. And this policy and executive report will go through the governance process to be presented to executive in July. So that's the idea. Any questions?
Okay, thank you for that. I think it's fair to say we've already gone down the corporate landlord model for our internal work, so that bit's done. But this is policy. Do you have any questions on the potential leasehold management policy? Yes, Kat. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in how we determine who will be the lessor when we have a property to lease. How do we decide who we're going to lease it to? It should not just be on best price, obviously, and it should vary according to the type of asset that's being leased. So I'm curious as to how a single policy can cover the range of different types of assets we might be leasing. I'll give an example. If you've got an enterprise centre, then you'll be preferentially leasing to startups, I would hope. If you've got a large piece of land, then you'll be leasing it to whichever farmer can give a best outcome. If you've got a warehouse, you'll be leasing it to someone, hopefully, who is generating employment in the area. So my question is, how do we determine what criteria are used for leasing? And I'm interested to know how a single policy could cover the different criteria.
Yeah, interesting that we have that sort of in process at the moment, in the sense that we do have in the past we've had a single policy, but there'll be caveats within that policy, so it won't be a one-size-fits-all within that policy, and that's why I think later on when the policy comes out, it will give those options for variation, because obviously there will be a situation like investment where we'll be looking for best value on most occasions, but not always, because if you can get someone with a better credit report, then you might be more interested in having them in the property. So it's quite in depth is that asset management policy, which will give us the options to vary why we take on a lessor or which one.
Well, I don't think that's got to the crux of the point I was making. I fully understand how you would perhaps go to a tenant who offers a lower rate income for us, but has a higher security for us. But what I was trying to get at was that we might well give leases where they are not necessarily financially productive, but are there to meet the other goals of the council, such as generating local businesses, supporting local services, and so on. So, for instance, if someone wanted to lease a property and they were going to offer a bus service, for instance, as part of their lease, whereas someone else was just going to use it as a depot, we might well say we'll go to the company that's offering a bus service because it's fixing another problem for us. That was my point, because that means that when we're considering the policy, we've got to be able to take into account the other goals and objectives and aspirations of the council. And that was why I was asking, how does a single policy meet those different desires?
So this policy isn't tackling it from that avenue. What this is trying to suggest is that, yes, there will be different service areas dealing with things in a different way, but what we want to do is we want those leases or those lease agreements to go through the asset management team, just so that it's a supportive arrangement. So we'll be dealing with it completely different in, like, for instance, a community centre. It's a completely different reason why you'll be, or who you'll be giving that lease to. But what we need is for that lease to come through asset management, so that we can make sure that that lease doesn't become onerous to the council. So it's about the lease itself, rather than who we're assigning it to. So, you know, it's not covering that. It's not going to be covering that side of things.
Yeah, but you've got the risk of opportunities are not marketed, which could lead to judicial review, which seems to contradict what you just said, because that implies that you're going to go to best value supplier, or best price supplier, I should say, rather than best return for the council overall. That's the reason why I raised this, because of that comment about judicial reviews.
So, yes, maybe that's probably just really to do with when we're dealing with certain cases. So if we are dealing with a case where it has to be market value, then we need to make sure that we've followed that process. And what it's doing is making sure that we're following the process. So it could be it could cover both those situations.
I think the report covers social value as well, which is what we're talking about. And Mrs. Crowley's got her hand up.
Yes, thank you. It was all very good points that you make, and it is a very complex situation to grant a lease, particularly when you're a council. And we are probably one of the few that have the broadest range of reasons for holding property. It is complex. The requirement for marketing is not about money, it's about transparency. It's giving opportunity to people where there is a choice and the lease isn't protected. It's giving opportunity to people to bid for an opportunity. And that's not necessarily money. It's also, where it would be a community centre, it's making sure that we tailor the marketing to the right audience so that qualifying groups can actually come forward. And then there is a process of a judgment process that we can document, and we will make the decision because the right people are being involved depending on the category. But it's a very good point you make. It is complex, and our aim is that this policy and the processes contained within it will actually assist members and hopefully provide some guidance and direction we're not here to prevent things happening. We're not here to try and get the best money or necessarily to get the least money. We are here to support services. So, for example, if it's a leisure centre, we are here to help guide the service through the procurement process so that we do it all properly and we get terms that secure the outcome that you want. Hopefully that gives you some assurance that we will cover this off in some detail in the policy.
Okay, thanks very much. If there's nothing else on that, I've been asked to move the highways and infrastructure item up because Mr. Kane has to go to another meeting, I think. I think we all have, a lot of us have, but if you want to cover that quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Chairs. I appreciate that. I'm mindful of time for everybody else as well. I think this item was really just a presentation on the highways and waste services rather than any policy discussion or development. So I'm very happy to whip through the presentation very quickly, but also happy to share it with members, and it's, you know, a reference pack for them should they want to refer to that at some point in the future. I shall see if I can share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. You can. Okay, so Highways and Waste, then I'm the Assistant Director, Graham Kane, for Highways and Waste. I'm well aware I could speak about Highways and Waste for many hours, and I'm also aware that we could have discussions for many hours and many elements of Highways and Waste. I suspect we don't have the time for that, but I'll give you a run through the services that we cover, and I'm always happy to talk about it at another place and time. So here's a reminder of what falls under Highways and Waste. On the highways on the left-hand side there, of course, we have the highways maintenance, which is looking after the extensive network that we have out there, roads, pavements, but also public rights-of-way and all sorts of assets, lighting, traffic lights, etc. Home to school transport, we transport thousands of pupils every day to their place of education, both in our mainstream home to school transport service, but also for those pupils who require additional support for their travel, who might have an educational health and care support plan. Strategic transport planning, you've heard a bit of that from Sally and Chris today. This is about thinking about what we need for our future network, but also around public transport and walking and cycling routes as well. Highways street lighting is provided through the Council's PFI contract with Balfour Beatty. The yellow box around there just reminds us that in actual fact this is one of the few contracts which still remains with West Northamptonshire leading on it and us receiving that service through the PFI that was set up, of course, underneath the Northamptonshire County Council. That's set to run for some years now, over a decade or so to go. Active travel we've mentioned already, that's current reference to walking and cycling, and highways development management, which again was referenced as part of the local transport plan conversations, is around making sure that when development comes forward in North Northampton, we're considering the impact on the highways, both during the process and also the delivery of that application. Within waste, of course, we collect from every single household across North Northampton every week. Recycling and waste collection, depending on where you are. You might have a food waste collection as well. We, of course, carry out extensive street cleaning, litter picking, sweeping the streets with our mechanical sweepers, emptying litter bins, removing graffiti, removing fly tips, etc. So a huge amount of work goes on to try and keep the streets of North and the rural areas of Northamptonshire clean. Bulky waste collections is a service that we offer to residents, a chargeable service which is very popular for them, very helpful for them to remove larger items from their property for a small charge. We have an enforcement team that spends a great deal of time and is very successful at tackling fly tipping, littering, particularly in dog fouling, but particularly fly tipping in the area. We do, as you know, get fly tips both in our urban and our rural areas, and they do a great job at trying to identify who might have put it there and following that up. We also have our household waste and recycling centres, of course 4 in North Northamptonshire, and the green box indicates that that is also a shared contract with West still until 2025, so we manage that contract on their behalf. And then finally, we have 5 closed landfills in North Northamptonshire where we have a variety of different responsibilities to monitor those landfills and manage them as appropriate to reduce the likelihood of any environmental impacts from those legacy sites. That's just a little sketch of our management team. I'll let you look at that in your leisure, but essentially myself there in the middle, and then my direct line reports for Highways and Waste, and then their line reports as well. Seems to have frozen on me. There we go. So just a reminder of how to report things. I appreciate, you know, in an operational service like ours, or a lot of it is operational service, we carry out a lot of functions every single day. Sometimes things go wrong. They don't get done as we might expect or want, and we need to know about it. So we encourage people to report things to us when things haven't gone on well. We want to do that in the most efficient way possible so that we can hear about the issue as quickly as possible and respond to that individual and rectify the issue as quickly as possible. So we encourage people to report where they can through the website. If they can't, of course, they can call a customer services team, but through the website is the most efficient for usually the resident and also the council, so we encourage that route. We're lucky on the website that we have, in this case, a lot of avenues to report things around highways. We've got the Street Doctor or Fix My Street system, so you can report all sorts of things through that system. And there's also a great deal of information on there about the services that we offer. Residents can read and learn about, which is hopefully helpful to them. In terms of waste and street cleaning, again, thanks to the team and also the web team for putting a great deal of information on there, all about our waste and street cleaning services. You can find out what your bin collection day is by putting on your postcode. You can report when your bin might have been missed. So, of course, as I say, we would love to get every single bin every time we're due to, but things do sometimes go wrong and we might miss a bin, but we want to know as quickly as possible. And the best way of doing that is clicking on that missed bin collection and then letting us know where you are and whether we missed your bin, and we'll come back and collect it as soon as we possibly can. So please do direct residents to the web services if you possibly can, and if they're able to use the online service, that's great. Just some achievements from 22-23, going through them very quickly. A great deal, as I mentioned, of enforcement around fly tipping, some successful fines and court orders issued, which is great because that helps to stop the people that are doing it, but also we hope is a disincentive, a deterrent to others who might think of disposing their waste illegally. We published our 3-year waste plan, which went to an EAP previously and also then on to the executive, and that outlined all the things that we knew we needed to do to progress our waste services over the next 3 years. We've got a lot to do in the next 3 years, so we wanted to spell that out in a plan, which is very helpful. We secured just over £6 million to upgrade our street lighting so that we can transfer the remaining highway street lights to LED, which of course brings energy savings, but also the carbon emission savings as well. So that's a 2-year program to roll that out. We transferred the Wellingborough North service, which was external to Wellingborough North. We transferred that in-house so that those colleagues now work alongside us as one of our in-house services. We rescheduled the Corby collection days, and the same for Wellingborough, which was necessary to try and balance out the loads. You find, obviously, with collections over time, you have growth in certain areas, and that puts pressure on certain rounds, so it's necessary to rebalance to make them as optimised and as efficient as we possibly can. We launched a new garden waste subscription service, which was no mean feat, and that obviously launched last month and is proving to be very popular and is bedding in well. We appointed our new highways contractor, Kier, after a number of years of carrying out procurement activity. So we have a new highways contract for Northamptonshire for at least the next 7 years. That helps us to deliver our own maintenance programme. We continue the development of the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. A number of those have now got to public consultation, which is really positive. Kettering's out at the moment, and we're looking to adopt those, or at least the Kettering one, as soon as possible once we have the feedback from consultation. So more will be coming through the committee system in due course. We've been promoting and installing electric vehicle charging points on the streets of Northamptonshire. this is in partnership with a private company using the Virgin Media network. So they've been rolled out in a number of different on-street locations so that people can park on their residential roads and charge up their e-vehicles, promoting the use of those vehicles, obviously, in that transition. We're developing the Isham bypass route, aiming for the submission of the business case to DFT and the planning application. We held a public consultation just towards the end of last calendar year. We've contributed towards national guidance on the adoption of roads, so it's always a complicated and interesting topic about the adoption of highway assets, and we've got a really strong team here in North Northampton, pleased to say, and the lead of that team has been contributing to national guidance on the best approach to adopt roads. So not only do we benefit from being involved in those conversations, but also other local authorities up and down the country also benefit from our contributions. And we installed 2 pedestrian bridges, impressive bridges. They are in a very complicated location, crossing the River Nene down at Chester House Estate, which enables people to walk to the estate from the various different public rights of way down that way. Apologies if I offended anybody with my pronunciation of the river. Projects for 23-24, so these outlined in our service guide, our service plan for the year ahead. So we've got some waste disposal contracts for waste to procure. Now these are very large contracts, both in the tonnage that goes through and also the value of them and the length of the period that they run for. So some complicated procurement for us to carry out over the next 18 months, and we started that with the executive paper that went previously. Similarly, we are to review the household waste and recycling centres because that contract comes to an end 2025. So we're carrying out a review of those HWRCs, and we'll be coming back to the appropriate EAPs for guidance on that as well as to what North Northamptonshire would like to do for the future of those very important sites. We need to review the waste collection and street cleaning services East Northamptonshire because they're currently contracted out to a contractor, FCC, and that comes to an end in 2025 as well. So there's a review there for EAP and the executive to consider as to what they wish to do with those services. We are still embedding the garden waste subscription service that I mentioned. We also want to promote the food waste service in Corby so that we get a greater uptake there. It comes with environmental benefits because it's a better way of taking the food waste off separately and using that to create agricultural fertiliser. But also it's cheaper and more cost effective for the local authority to dispose of it as food waste rather than through the black general waste bin. So there's a win-win there for residents and the local authority. We're going to progress those LC WIPs that I talked about, the cycling and walking infrastructure plans. You've heard about the local transport plan just a second ago. I've mentioned the Isham bypass and the planning application and the outline business case, which we want to see submitted this year. We'll roll out that street lighting LED programme I mentioned, embed the new Kia contract on the highways maintenance. We also have the opportunity to develop up under moving traffic offences, develop some enforcement schemes if the local authority decides to do so. Currently, moving traffic offences are only enforced by the police. They have jurisdiction for enforcing those. The Highways Authority doesn't. We've made an application to DFT to take on those powers. We expect to hear positively in June, July time, at which point we can then consider as an authority how we wish to use those powers. And then finally, home to school transport, we're looking at how we can revise that policy and the processes behind that to implement the service as best as we can. And there's a consultation currently out for consideration. So please do take a look at that and point people towards the home to school transport consultation. So a great deal to do alongside our usual day-to-day activities throughout the year. But given our success last year, I'm very confident we'll be able to deliver that. And that, Chair, takes me to the final slide just to say that's a very quick run through our services. That's helpful, very happy to share those slides and very happy to have discussions at any point with councillors who might be interested. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As there actually isn't a paper to follow for exec on that, I'm going to suggest that if people have questions, they send you an email which will let us get on to back on track in time-wise. Thank you for that.
Very happy.
Explanation. I think people can come to you with specific inquiries on that. So over to you.
I was going to say it's not really over to me that much, as it's going to be over to officers to present this paper. As you've already done this once before at an EAP. So hopefully this will kind of be old hat for you to present to us again. And Catherine, I assume it's going to yourself, or is it Ian doing it today? Or is it a duo?
I'm happy just to introduce the paper, Chair. So basically what you've got before you is a proposal in relation to addressing public space protection measures to deal with dog control across the whole of North Northants, to bring it within a singular order and to effectively seek your comments on the scope of that order prior to going out to consultation and then being reported on to Executive on the 8th of June for their agreement to actually go out to consultation. And I'll let Catherine summarise the main details of the report for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Catherine Clooney. I'm the Environmental Protection Manager. So currently we have 3 public space protection orders in relation to dog control in 3 legacy authority areas. So Corby is the only area that is not currently covered by any PSPO for dog control. The existing 3 orders we have will end in November 2023. The Kettering order was due to end in August 2023, but following legal advice, we have actually extended that to in line with the remaining orders. We did do a short 2-week consultation on that where no concerns were raised. So that order will also currently end in November 2023. We want to ensure consistency across North Northamptonshire. So that's why we're proposing a new PSPO for dog control. We have done a draft proposed order, which can be found in Appendix A. So this order includes all the areas previously covered by dog control PSPOs. Additional areas within Corby will need to be added once these have been agreed, as well as obviously part of the consultation exercise. Appendix B actually is a scoping document, so I think sometimes what we've written in here might be slightly confusing. So not all these areas will be included within the dog PSPO. This was a scoping exercise for officers because we don't currently have one for Corby. So we compiled that in conjunction with internal colleagues who've got local knowledge with functions about parks, open spaces and public amenities, about cemeteries, and in line with the proposed measures within the draft order. So the table provides information on enclosed play, amenity areas and access points and existing dog control signage already. So it does look like, for example, in some of the cemeteries within the Corby area, there are already signs about dogs on leads. So that is useful information for us about what may already be required. In producing the proposed PSPOs, we have also sought initial views from town and parish councils in relation to key locations to get their initial feedback. The creation of a PSPO is a very lengthy process and it does require suitable public and wider statutory consultation. So this order will have a 2-stage consultation period to give us ample time to consider the views of the public on the areas to be included and other statutory consultees. So to commence consultation and to implement the order, approval from the Executive will be required.
So thank you very much for that, and thank you to Ian and Catherine for actually a very comprehensive and clear report. So I'll now open this up to Councillor Mercer. Straight over to you.
Thank you very much. I've come from an area where we've had dog control orders for quite some time, and I'm fully in support of them. However, even with the dog control orders, we've had cases recently where people were taken to hospital to have a dog's tooth removed from their ankle, and where dogs have attacked people in the parks. So the big question for me is, with an extension to the dog control order areas, will we be extending the amount of manpower available for the enforcement of them?
Okay, there's obviously 2 elements to that question. We do currently have several departments for different directorates who are involved in dog control enforcement. So as has already been mentioned, we do have the waste enforcement team who have those powers. We do have environmental wardens, we do have dog wardens. That's something that we do need to look at once we've implemented of how we're going to enforce. the order. In terms of dogs attacking people, I mean, that's one of the provisions we want to put in is dogs on leash by direction by an authorised officer, so an officer can do that. We do also enforce provisions with dogs out of control with CPNWs and CPNs. There is another provision that we do with dog-on-dog attacks or dogs attacking people. We do work very closely with Northants Police on that as well. So outside of the PSPO, there are other aspects and enforcement that we do utilise currently to deal with the issues that you've already mentioned.
Yeah, so that what that means effectively is that we're going to look at perhaps 20 or 30% increase in the workload if we do it to the same level, but we don't seem to be having a 20 to 30% increase in the budget for doing the work. That's the thing that concerns me.
I mean, we do currently obviously enforce over 3 sovereign areas already, and within the Corby area we do have staff who do have that function, and it's, even though we don't have a PSPO in Corby, we do get complaints about dog fouling, we do get complaints about dog control, and there are other powers as well that we can use. This is just another enforcement toolkit that we can use to deal with those issues that you have mentioned. So I do think that we do have adequate capacity, and it's something we need to look at in terms of restructures, but there are officers from a variety of departments who do currently do that, including in Corby, but this is an extra toolkit to be able to issue FPNs in addition.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Councillor Allibone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm certainly supportive of enforcing dog control. We have an ongoing problem at Eastern Mordett, and as a farmer, I have, I think, about most of my rights of way go across cereal, arable land, but we have 3 grass fields where we have rights of way, and it's very difficult when dogs aren't kept on leads, because if they're kept on leads, their owners can see what they're up to, and then they can pick up after them. But if they're roaming across a field, particularly when we've got sheep and lambs in, it's a bit of a Wild West out there. There is a cross-contamination issue, and I forget the Latin name for it. I did know it because I talked about it at the parish meeting some while ago. But it's a mite that causes something called GID in a sheep's brain, and it destroys their balance, and they just go round and round in circles. So you have to put them down. There isn't much you can do about it. So I think it's important to try and get people to behave more responsibly with dogs. And my other pet gripe, considering we went to the trouble of putting in a dog bin at the top of one of our widely used footpaths, is the tying of plastic bags onto trees and hedges, it really irritates me. You're much better not to pick up after the dog, because in time it would rot down anyway. But I'm fully supportive of trying to sort of solve a problem which seems to be growing, because more and more people seem to have dogs these days, and yet very few seem to know how to train them or to behave with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have any comments to come back on that one?
No, I can completely understand where you're coming from on that. Yeah, I think as part of this, obviously education, like you said, is important as well. We have historically done a lot of education in schools with other teams, so I think obviously that is part of it as well, is the education, not just the enforcement.
I think Councillor Allibone raises a very good point there. I think it's a pet hate of a number of people, myself included, will make exactly the same observation as yourself, Councillor Allibone, with regards to the fact that it would rot down over time, but it won't in a plastic bag, which is going to take, 10,000 years to degrade on a tree. I did wonder that, and I know that the order, or the proposed order, does make it very clear under the section for the purposes of this order and about the removal of that. I did wonder whether almost we needed to add it as a separate actual condition within there about leaving the waste somewhere unauthorised, i.e. tied to a tree as to whether we do that to discourage it, because of course I think Councillor Andy Mercer quite rightly raised the enforcement aspect of it, and as we know, and it does make it very clear in the report, that this is an element of discouragement to try and change behaviours. It's not necessarily just about enforcement and issuing fines, it is about trying to change behaviours. Therefore I do wonder whether it should be in there as a separate thing to perhaps do that and discourage that, and I don't know whether any members have any thoughts on that themselves. Councillor Mercer.
I fully agree with what you said. We need to make steps in the direction of education. It's always better to educate someone not to do something than to enforce against them to do it. Worst case of all is having to engineer a change in the environment to make it impossible. The 3 E's, always try education first, enforcement next, and engineering last. It's the most expensive and it's the least flexible. Education is where you should win.
Yeah, obviously we do outline in the report about the number of complaints and fixed penalty notices as well, but as you've outlined, it's not all about the fixed penalty notices, so it doesn't provide an indication of officers that have done patrols and who have had a visual presence and who provided advice to members of the public as well on that, and also the number of complaints that have come in reported by members of the public that they've seen somebody who has failed regularly to pick up after a dog. So all those complaints have been followed through by officers. So sometimes they have had CPNWs reminding about PSPO, or letters have been sent out to residents, and that behaviour has stopped as well. So there is a lot more to it than just a fixed penalty notice. But in terms of the bags, I think that's something we can maybe consider and with legal and see if there's any additional wording we can kind of put in to make it clear that it's not a case of putting it in a bag and then putting it into a hedge or somewhere else. So we can have a look at that. Obviously, once they've done that, it becomes a littering offence as well, potentially. So, but yeah, we can look at the wording and make that clear.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much. I'm sure it's the bane of certain people's lives who live quite often at the end of a public footpath across a field, and for some reason, I've seen it myself, residents decide that it's acceptable to leave it there because there's perhaps not a bin right slap bang at the end of a public footpath. I did just have a couple of just quick questions with regards to clarification. Of course, the order does state about it being enforced through an authorised officer and talks about partnership agencies. So just question number one is just a quick point of clarification. Does that include the police as a partnership agency? And question number two, again, just a point of clarification. Under Schedule 1I, the bit around it being over highways, footways, cycleways, etc. I just wondered whether then that schedule is talking about all public highways, byways, etc. As Councillor Allibone mentions about public rights of way across fields, I assume that would not be included because it's not NNC property, or is it included because it would be classed under that schedule?
Okay. The first point is that would include Northants Police, and I think historically they have issued them. Obviously, whether they've got any resources to do that, but obviously they will have the powers, and that is obviously something we do let them know, and they are consulted on this PSPO as well. In terms of Schedule 1, I don't think that will include that, but I will get some clarification on that as well for you, so we can come back to you on that.
That would be great. Thank you very much, and thank you for clarifying that. And I do think that we'd absolutely have to be on point with Northants Police and making sure that they are aware of that power and they can enforce it, especially when it comes to places like our town centres where they'll have police community support officers on patrol who will be able to issue fines. Thank you very much. Are there any other points on this section, or we have to move on? No? Okay. So, as we've skipped an item in the agenda and moved it forward, we're now over to the forward plan. you like to pick this one up, co-chair?
Thank you for that. This is on page 59 of your papers. There's today's agenda, but also the one for July. We've been, what are people's views on it? We've been quite packed today, and there's quite a lot of items there. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I presume these are items that are scheduled to come to the Executive at some point. But something that I've been looking out for, but I haven't seen yet, is the revision of the Minerals and Waste Plan. That it will be very controversial, and it will have to be addressed at some point. The reason why I say it's going to be controversial is because North Northants produces more minerals than it needs, and it's currently exported to West Northants. The government's direction is that each area should be self-supportive for minerals and waste, particularly for minerals for road building, etc. So at some point there's going to have to be a discussion with perhaps some hard choices made on that. So I'm looking forward to seeing when that comes forward.
Just looking at the forward plan, home to school transport comes up, funny enough, the next day. And strategic transport model comes up in July, and in August, apart from asset acquisition, and that's all that's on there so far. So the others are dates to be determined. I don't know if any officer can guide us on, because some of the descriptions are quite short.
Shall I come in there, Chair? Yeah. Would that be helpful? So just on the home to school transport, what we are suggesting is we're currently out to consultation on the policy. And what we're therefore suggesting is to arrange a joint EAP with Prosperous Communities and Future Communities, which covers children and education, and to share the outcomes of that prior to any paper going back to executive. So whilst it's down on the forward plan, as you can see there, we're probably going to arrange a joint meeting, if that's okay, prior to it going to the executive on the 13th of July. And we'll liaise with Democratic Services to arrange a suitable date that fits in with the timetable. So that will probably come off that date, but there'll be a separate date coordinated. In terms of the other items, future strategies, I'm going to need to refresh my mind. I'm not quite sure what that is from memory. I'm just looking at David Watts, but I can't think of anything. There's lots of future strategies that are in development. So.
I think what we've agreed at the first meeting was that where we know that there are strategies being developed, what we didn't want to bring to the EAP was a completed strategy and say, we just want you to rubber stamp this. It was more about bringing it in at earlier stages so that elected members could consider and inform perhaps some of the approach that we would take with it. So it was about encouraging officers to think about the strategies that are in development and at what point they need to be added to the forward plan for this EAP.
Yeah. Active travel strategy, I'm not quite sure that's going to be ready for that meeting, but I think we'd want to put it on the forward plan in this calendar year. So I think we can come back as to when would be a suitable date for that. And likewise, what we'll be doing is we'll be doing a further update on the PSPO, but that will be later on in the year. So if with permission, chairs, what we're happy to do is tighten these up and put specific dates through the relevant lead office, some of which are in the room this afternoon, so we can coordinate that and put them on future agendas, if that's okay.
Anyone, any other particular comments? Wish list? Anything? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. We've just about managed to get it into the 2 hours. We've got 3 minutes to our next meeting in another